This is House Planning Help episode 104. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you want to build new or renovate. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. My personal goal is to create an energy efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. Coming up, I'm getting some inspiration in an episode that we're calling How I Found My Plot of Land. And no, it's not my story. In fact, that's probably where we should start today, because last time I told you about the second bid that I had put in on a plot of land. It takes a while to get one that you're happy with. So the story was, I went there, I was quite pleased with the work that we put in to appraise the plot. We chatted to neighbours, and what I found strange, I don't know whether they've been talking together, but the neighbours both thought it was worth fairly similar values. One said 140,000, the other said 160,000, and then the one that said 160,000 said, if you really want it, put in 200,000. I, however, have been looking at this equation that we've talked about before, the land cost plus the build cost plus the profit margin of, say, typically 20 to 30% is less than or equal to the house value. And this is how I worked it, that we came out with a figure of 242. That was what we put in, 242,000. Looking at a house size before, they got permission to build one of 100 metres square. And we thought that actually that would probably come up a little bit. But if we're building a passive house, complete guessing here. Obviously, this is on a sliding scale. We know that. But we were saying about £1,500 per square metre. And so we were quite pleased that that put us in at a value. Most of the houses down there are worth either 500,000 for, say, a 3-bedroom house or 600,000 for a 4-bedroom house. That's how we do it in the UK. We do it on bedrooms rather than size, which is totally crazy. That's just a guide. So I was really happy. We consulted with friends who were in real estate, with someone who actually values land. That's what he does. And we were told, when we lost out on this bid, of course, that actually we'd put in a really respectable offer. It was sealed bid, so it's not as if we could even up our bid once we found out that we'd lost. This is feedback that we found quite interesting, because initially they wouldn't reveal how much it had gone to, and we pushed them along the lines of, well, look, we want to learn here. We keep on missing out. We'd like to get building this house. How much did it go for? They had 27 bids in total for this plot of land. It's about 0.12 of an acre. Not huge, but that's why we liked it too, because they weren't going to build 100 houses on it. Let's say there were 26 bids that were probably in our range around there. And they said one stood out a mile, which was around about £100,000 more than everyone else. See, how can you compete with that? It was a couple who I assume must have been retired, but they were downsizing from a big house, and they just liked that location. They wanted it, probably could afford to put that money straight in there, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work with the equation. How dare it? But in some ways, I'm not actually that upset that we lost out on this one, because I feel that we did everything right, and when we're up against this, it's not to be. And the plot wasn't perfect. I'm pleased that we put in a bid. I could definitely have seen myself living there, but there were some downsides. For example, there'd be a lot of traffic going to the school, as in pedestrians going past in the morning, which might not have been so good. There was that cricket thing that it was on the edge of a cricket pitch in summer, where potentially that could mean cricket balls hitting the house, which also I didn't really like the sound of that, even though it would be a great architectural challenge. So that's where I'm at. Back again, we're going to start doing this. But let's get some inspiration from some other people who have successfully bought their plots. And I've got to thank Simon Benson, who emailed me. This was a couple of months back when I think we lost out on the first one, saying it took him 5 years to find his plot, but he has finally finished building his Weber house. I'm not sure whether that includes the building time as well. And he says to me, have you considered making a request in your podcast for possible sites in the area you wish to build it? Well, I have thought about that, but if you're listening to this, I've just assumed that most of you know that I live in Hertford, UK, even if you don't really know where that is. So why not make this official? If you are someone who has land in this area, we will look at anything. We're obviously keen to get things moving, and we're going to try and up the ante if we can at all at this end, because I must admit, up until now, we've just gone down the easy route. It's a time thing, isn't it? That you've got to put in more time if you want to try some, perhaps, of the strategies that you're about to hear today. So let's get into those. We've got 4 case studies, 1 from Ireland, 2 in England and 1 in Australia. And we're going to start with the one in Ireland. This podcast is fantastic for connecting me with other self-builders, and quite often they email with a question that they want me to go and find out or just to say hi, and Donal O'Leary was one such person. And we've been chatting off and on probably for about 9 months, nearly going on a year. And that's why I knew when it came to this episode, I would ask him nicely and see if he would share his story. I think the first time I asked, actually, it wasn't good because he wasn't 100% sure it was going ahead, but it's all looking good now. So let's catch up with him. First of all, I asked how easy it was to find land where he lived.
There's a couple of typical routes here in Ireland and in my area where people are looking for plots or looking for land. And generally speaking, it's a number of routes. So it's property websites, estate agents, obviously, local newspapers and magazines, that kind of thing, and also word of mouth. So, we looked at all of these avenues when we started our search, primarily websites and estate agents. And actually, when we went looking for it, we were looking for a house. We weren't looking for a site per se. We weren't looking for a plot. But we saw this house for sale. It was a derelict house. And a nice site in terms of size, and we approached the estate agent to see the price, etc. So we basically entered a bidding process for a derelict house. So almost by default it became a plot because we looked at it and it was in pretty bad repair, so we had to really reconsider in terms of converting the house or trying to restore it. So it was basically going to be a build. So I suppose that's how we found the house. So we discovered it in a fairly traditional manner from an estate agent. But as we progressed with the bidding process, it quickly became apparent that it was quite popular with other people as well. So you're quite familiar with this yourself, Ben.
Yes, yeah. And what was the bidding process?
It was a straightforward, place the bid over the phone, name your price, and then the estate agent would thank you for your bid and come back a couple of days later and say, well, actually, someone else has bid more.
Sealed bids?
Not actually sealed bids, it was just verbal over the phone. So we'd make an offer of X euros and he would then say, well, the other parties have come back with a higher bid, and it went up and up and up until we basically reached a point where, it was well beyond our budget. But yeah, it was just verbal bids over the phone.
And what happened next?
So at that point we said, well, okay, that's that one gone. And we, just kept in touch with the estate agent. Obviously, I said to him, if anything falls through, keep me in mind, etc. But as I said, it was well outside our budget. So we continued our search elsewhere, but in parallel, I made some queries locally just to see if there might be any other sites available in the vicinity. And through fortune, I should say, we actually made contact with the person who was basically the guy who was buying the plot or the house. And that was just because of the area it was in. It was a neighbouring property that had bought it, or was the person that was buying it. So we had a couple of discussions with this guy, and to make a long story short, we reached an agreement to purchase part of the site. So the house was situated on about a half an acre, so there was basically enough room for more than one house there. So
how on earth did you convince the owner, though? Or I want to know how you got into that conversation.
Well, we basically, as I said, I found out who it was through the grapevine, for want of a better term, and I had a discussion with him. I told him my story. I said, look, we're trying to build a house. We're not looking for a big mansion or anything. He had a similar kind of outlook. He said, look, I don't need all the land. There's plenty of room there. And it was basically a fortune. And we had this ongoing discussion back and forth for a couple of weeks. Not in terms of money. It was purely just in terms of what do you want to do. And he had his plans for his site and his adjoining land. So it was really just pure good luck on that score. But then the fun and game started with prices and valuing what each part of the land was worth, and we had to talk to our legal guys to draft up an agreement. So there was a lot of that stuff, but in a nutshell, we just got lucky, I think, and the guy we were speaking to was reasonable, and he was happy to go with our plan. So a bit of good luck comes with perseverance sometimes.
Was it half the value of the house? You're getting half the plot. You knew what the overall value was, or does it not work like that?
It wasn't exactly half the plot. So It wasn't half the price, no. It was it was kind of 55-45. But effectively, yeah, that's the way we kind of came to the agreement. It was based on area and size,
So really, this story is about if you don't ask, you don't get.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So, and I know you have some stuff on your website in the hub about, knocking on doors, walking the dog around the place, looking at Google Earth, all that good stuff. I'd agree 100%. We did a lot of that stuff. But in this instance, because of where it was, because we kind of knew the area, we basically made contact with the person. So yeah, it is a case of, if you don't ask, you won't get, so don't be afraid to ask.
Were there any hurdles to jump in terms of convincing whatever planning system you have over there that this would work, that you could split it into two, or was it fairly straightforward?
Yeah, good question. It was a little bit more complicated than if it were just a straightforward, buy the plot, submit your plans, and away you go. Because there was two parties and there was two separate goals, if you like. So we were both doing our own thing, but we went in on a joint planning application. So that was a bit different from the norm, which did complicate it. But in the end, we're actually still in the middle of the finalising the planning process. So hopefully this should be sorted in the next couple of weeks. But yes, it did complicate it. And going back to your earlier point about the price, we had to factor that into the negotiations in terms of, well, look, this isn't a straightforward purchase. We'll be kind of complicating matters with the planning process and all that. So that did kind of play into the price negotiations as well.
And finally, do you have any tips for people looking for land, no matter where they are in the world?
Well, I think perseverance, as we mentioned, is the first one. Patience is another one because, as you well know, it doesn't just happen quickly. We've been at this for a couple of years. I would knock on doors literally and talk to people. I've even heard people putting up local notices, these ads in supermarkets and shopping centres with their phone number. So, I would pursue all avenues and literally walk the pavements, take a different look at it. Don't just look at a kind of an overgrown field as that. It could very easily be transformed into a plot or a site. But, be prepared for the long haul and stay patient and persistent, and hopefully things will come your way eventually.
That is Donal. A big thank you to him. Before we move on, I wanted to mention he is a blogger as well who hopes to write about his build. I've seen some of his other blog posts too, packed full of information, very well written, and he's a bit of a whiz at photography too. In my mind, sounds like a perfect blogger. So we're going to link up his website in the show notes, and as that builds, I just know it's going to be a great resource. It's all about sharing, isn't it? If you're doing a house build, an energy efficient house, a passive house, please do the same. Get that message out there. So next we're going to move to someone who bought a house ripe for knocking down, redeveloping, starting all over again. And this one is not only in a desirable city, probably one of the best in the world, Sydney, Australia, but in a sought after location, that of Manly, where all the surfers are. If you've ever been to Australia, to Sydney, you may have been there, well connected to, as Nicki's going to talk about. I started though by asking her to explain how her project began.
Well, we were living overseas and we wanted to get back into the Sydney market. So the internet was where we started, and Sydney Morning Herald real estate pages. And then I went to a few auctions and missed out on a few properties nearby because the market was going up so much. We were outbidded quite a few times. And then I went for a drive after being outbidded on one auction in Clontarf and noticed this house for sale. And I rang up the agent when I was outside on the street and made an appointment. And then he came out and showed us through, and I noticed that the beach was 5 minutes walk away. So we asked, how much the property had been passed in at auction about a month before. So, and then... we made an offer, and that's it, pretty much.
So just rewinding there for a second, when you were at the auction, first of all, did you have to visit each different plot and check it out and decide, I really want this first? Or were you looking at the price and thinking, well, it's going to be at this price? How did you determine which plot you actually went for? Or did you just try for multiple different ones?
Yeah, well, it was really location and then price and the facilities, public transport and schools and,
So you had a very specific area, and you're not directly in the middle of the city, but this is still a very desirable part of Sydney. What would have happened if you'd gone out in the countryside? Would it then just become incredibly easy to find land and build? Or because in the UK we have all sorts of different permissions that you have to get, so it's not just a case of buying a house or a plot. You have to be careful that you can build on it.
Okay, yes. To build here, you need you can build through two ways, so like a development application through your local council, or a CTC, which is a conforming development. We didn't really know about either of them particularly, but we knew the house was very old and we could renovate it completely or possibly knock it down. So we didn't really look that far ahead. We should have spent more time, but because we were living overseas.
Or you had to do this all remotely, really, or were you a scouting party?
A short space of time. Normally you'd live in the area and you'd have lots of time to investigate what you can do to a property through the council and talk to people. And so it was a bit of luck that we can actually knock this place, level it. We didn't think that we could actually when we bought the place. So I would really recommend investigating, spending more time doing that, ideally, because I think it's preferable to knock a place down and build new than renovating.
And how did you know that the plot that you actually bought in the end was the one? Because this is what I'm struggling with, going through and seeing various properties that, okay, they're all good, but would you have been happy with anything in this area that you targeted?
Well, for us, it's personal. I mean, I like the beach, and traffic in Sydney is pretty horrendous. So having a ferry directly into the city just opens up, it doesn't matter how bad it gets. You can always jump on a ferry and get somewhere, So, so those two things are really, really important. And we were looking at sort of when our kids have grown up and finished schools and stuff. So this area is like a big playground, so it's a great place to retire into.
So that's Nicki's story, and it didn't sound too much of an ordeal. Certainly something that I'm starting to wonder about whether I should be looking in auctions. We have one more auction story, although this time we're heading back to the UK, quite close to Glastonbury. And we did have a little bit of colour when we talked about Manly being the surfing destination. Well, I'm going to class Glastonbury as a huge music place, although it only happens once a year. If you've ever heard of it, the Glastonbury Festival, it's huge, and I've been, I think, 3 times and loved it each time. Anyway, Arun Alex lives not far from there, and I asked him how his search for land had been.
I have been looking for a plot for quite some time, actually, because it was something very important for me to try to build my own house according to the energy efficiency standards that I would like to have in my house. And for the past, I would say 4 or 5 years, I have been looking at various sites, Rightmove, Plot Finder, other sites. I have also looked at the option of looking at the council's website. I have been to the shows, home building renovation shows, and there's a chap called Tim Pullen, I think. He has advised that it's a good idea to look at the council websites to see where the planning permission is being granted and see if you can contact the owners. I have looked at it, but I haven't had the courage to actually approach them. So I've been just, window shopping, if you know what I mean. But I have actually put in a couple of offers on a plot with outline planning permission, but unfortunately they all got rejected because, I was outbid, if you know what I mean. So that is why I had to take the choice of compromising my options a little bit and to try to go for a plot without planning permission, but with the chances of obtaining planning permission in the future.
A couple of questions there. First of all, when you were looking at those other plots, what was it that made you want to put in a bid in the first place, or were you looking to snap up a bargain?
The bargain aspect was tempting, But the other thing was with the other plot, the two plots that I put offer in, they didn't have full planning permission. They had outline planning permission, which means I could there is a principle in agreement with the council that you could build a house, but the scale of the house and the appearance of the house wasn't fixed. So there is, I think, the term that they use is called reserved matters. So that was up to the person who was going to build the house to decide. And that was important for me to design the house with my liking and suits my family's requirements. And that was one of the prime reasons that I put the offer for these two plots, because it had only outline permission. So I could have the option of going for the full planning application with the type and design of the house that I liked.
How did you know what to put in as a good offer?
Again, it is very important to attend seminars, read books, and things like that. So you get a rough idea of the end value of the property. And you need to take into account the cost of the plot. You need to take into account the cost of the build. And you have a rough idea of the type of construction method that you're going to use, providing the groundworks is okay and there is no coal mine underneath the foundation or anything like that. You're assuming things to be on the safe side. So you take into account the cost of the build, the cost of the land, and you add about 20 to 30% of uplift. And if that's the way you try to calculate, and then you based your judgment on that, and then you put an offer based on that.
Okay, so the piece of land that you ended up buying, very risky not to have any planning attached to it, but why did you think that you still wanted to do this?
There wasn't any planning granted to it, but I had a preliminary chat with a planning consultant who said that, there is a possibility you could have a house built if you could get the design, mass, and the scale right. And it came at an auction, so you could know by the end of the day whether you are the owner or not. With the other plots, sometimes, you could be left in limbo for weeks or sometimes a couple of months in my previous experience. And I think I got to the point, I need to have a piece of land. Look, I can't play the estate agent games anymore. And it was within about 2 or 3 miles from where I work. So from minimizing the carbon footprint, I could easily cycle to the place where I work, or extreme days I could even walk. So I thought, it was a good opportunity to buy the land and to see how it is.
And at the auction, was it a fight with lots of other people, or had you... Because I've heard before at auctions, actually, that there's a reason why they're going through auction. So when you looked at your plot, you were quite clear about what you were getting into.
Well, I definitely had a purpose in mind. I wanted to use the plot to build a house. And I don't know the intentions of my co-bidders, what their purpose was, whether it was as an investment or they wanted to continue to use it as a shed or perhaps to build a house. I don't know. I haven't had any contact with them. But I think on the bidding day, there were about 4 or 5 people and I was sitting right at the front. So I didn't know how many people were behind me, but I think there were about 4 or 5 people. And towards the final stage of the auction, it was a war between me and just one person. And luckily I won.
That's Arun Alex, again successful after buying at auction. And I'm going to note this down, that we need to dedicate a podcast episode to buying at auction, the ins and outs, what to make sure that you avoid. That one coming up in the future. One more finding land story then, and it's coming close to home for me. In fact, this is one I've watched as it's come about. I thought, wow, you've been clever here. Glen from Studio One Construction, he's going to explain how he got his plot.
Well, the property we bought was on the market for 4 months as a commercial property. And at the time, there was a recession and no one was buying commercial. So we went in with a low bid, which was refused. And then I went away on holiday and came back with another bid, which was accepted. And then I went away on another holiday and I decided to reduce the bid down again. And he finally came round because he'd bought another property to expand. He needed to expand his electrical business. We took a punt and we bought it with no planning permission whatsoever for any properties at the back. So because it had 15 garages, we brought the retired chief planning officer round from Hertford Council,
Harvey Fairbrass, and he said we had a 50-50 chance of getting permission to build a house there. So on that, we realised that our new neighbour was an architect, and with my girlfriend and her designs and my designs and his designs, he came up with a plan to build a very low-lying property which didn't block any light from any of the gardens. And we then constructed a small model which we took to all our neighbours and showed them all, apart from one who wasn't very happy about the size of the chimney. Put it in for planning, and the council came back after 8 weeks with no problems whatsoever and agreed that we could build this eco house behind a commercial unit where we were living at the time.
Did it help that it was during a recession? Did that help in terms of acquiring it at a good price?
We got it. We got it at a good price because no one wanted to take a chance on it. Various developers had looked at it, of knocking the whole building down and building 4 houses, which...
You've only got one, and they were looking at 4.
Working at 4, of knocking down the original front building. And so by retaining the front building, we gained a rental property and a flat upstairs where we lived for a year. And after the first year we moved in, and then the following year we finished it all off. So it took 2 years to build, basically.
It wasn't exactly all the land you needed. So how were you able to convince those other people of just the little extra bits that have made the big difference?
Well, a piece of land came up when one of our neighbours passed away, and the land was left to trust. And we contacted the solicitors who agreed to sell off part of his garden. I think we paid £20,000 for it, which made a huge difference to our house because we gained a huge garden and a big area where I converted into a tool shed, which gets most of the light during the afternoon. So that is our main garden. Otherwise, the size and shape of the house would have been a very small courtyard garden with not a lot of sunlight coming into it.
What would have been the worst case scenario then if you'd bought this? You must have weighed that up, 50-50 chance you were taking a risk.
It would have ended up with me having it as a builder's yard, probably renting out some of the units to various different people for storage, where I could have made a little bit of money, but it would have been a disaster as far as we sold a lovely house to take a chance on building our own house. So if it didn't come off, it wouldn't have been very good. We would have been left in a small apartment upstairs, and we would have probably had to try and get change of use to convert the ground floor into a residential so we could make a bigger house. So, sooner or later, but now that the planning laws have changed, it would have been a lot more favourable nowadays than 4 years ago.
I'm looking for land. I've put in 2 bids so far that haven't got me where I need to be. Ideally, I'd love it to be in Hertford, which is obviously where you are too. Do you think there's any advice you can give me?
You're better off looking for houses in poorer areas that have got large gardens, where you can build a house in the back garden or split the plot down the middle, or a bungalow where you can knock the bungalow down and build 2 houses. That's the only chance, really. Buying land now is at premium. Everyone's trying to buy it, and it's quite expensive to build your own place. We spent $450,000 building our house, and that was with my labour for free. So if you factor that in, it's another 200. It probably would have been 650, 700,000 to build what we've got. Even the land, I think we paid 330 for the commercial unit, the flat upstairs, and the land at the back. So it's quite a tidy sum when you add it all together if you had to do it and employ a builder. So the best way forward at the moment is definitely to try and get a place, get the planning on it to build 2, and then the bank will raise, you can borrow the money against the bank, and they'll help you to build the houses. Once they start coming out of the ground, they'll release money. And once you've built the first one, you can move into that, develop the second one and sell it.
Lots to think about. I'd like to thank Glen Arun, Nicki and Donal for their time. And in the show notes that go along with this session, we've got the key points from each story, also photos of the plots and where a house has been completed. We'll show you that too. Houseplanningshelp.com/104. In fact, we're going to continue our call to action down this route. We have a free course on finding land in the hub. So it's at houseplanningshelp.com/hub. You can sign up for that free course and it covers all of the different ways that we've heard about. And the nice thing is, after doing 104 podcasts, we've heard a few land stories. So we're tying together, what are the common themes? How have people done this? How have they saved money? So take a look at that course. It's in the hub, houseplanningshelp.com/hub. Thanks again for listening. Love you being there. It's brilliant. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media. Content that matters.